Good evening. I'm Ed Buggs, your host for this presentation, a presentation we hope will be an inspiration for all of you. Tonight, we look at Capitol High School, an institution of education that has certainly touched the lives of thousands of Baton Rouge citizens. From this stage, we'll begin our journey. We'll go back 44 years to the year 1950. We'll begin with a song well known to many, yet for others, they don't know it even exists. The song was written more than 4 decades ago by a man named Charles W. Keel, former principal of Capitol High School and cornerstone of Capitol Pride. The song, Capitol High School's first alma mater.
Oh yes, that little creation had been, that was left at Capitol Junior School because it was based on the experiences at that setting. No, you don't transfer those things, you see. I finally came to visit for Easter, and the school was up, and I walked into the front door of that building on Capitol Avenue, and they were putting down the terrazzo floors. And the superintendent had said, it had already been settled that I would be the principal of that school. Mr. Brumfield, we had operated, I guess, better than a month. And one day, secretary said, Mr. Keel, there's a school official on the line wanting to talk to you. He said, I said, hello, Charles Keel speaking. Yeah, Charles, this is Superintendent, whatever his name was. He said, what's the name of that school you've got out there? We know you're there, but does it have a name? I said, just a minute. When I asked the secretary, I said, what's the name of that street out there? She said, that's Capitol Avenue. I said, Mr. Superintendent, this is the Capitol Avenue Junior and Senior High School. Well, thank you. Now we have a name. He said, I'm glad you've gotten that out of the way. But he didn't know it had just happened. So we named the school after the name of the street. Capitol Junior and Senior High School was born. In that it was new, we couldn't speak of its beauty and our love for it because all of us were spanking brand new, walking brand new halls, and using items that had never been used before by anybody. And it was the first break in the educational experiences that Baton Rouge had had for years. Because as you and I talked earlier, McKinley had been the only source of a high school education for black ladies and gentlemen over the years. And young men and women came from all of the surrounding areas to go to school at McKinley. They came here and lived with relatives, friends, things like that. Just like students now come to the city to go to the universities. It was the break of McKinley that started Capitol. But when Capitol Junior Senior High School was built, high school youngsters had to do the same thing. There was a session with the superintendent and some members of his staff. He says, now, to begin with, a goodly portion of the youngsters that you're going to have to open with are the seniors at the McKinley High School who live in another district. You'll be responsible your first year for graduating those youngsters. And half of the students, of the rest of the student body at McKinley will be sent to you also. Now you will have the option of choosing the members of the faculty from McKinley that you'd like to work with. I said, well, I wouldn't like to choose. I'd rather have, in a new setting like this, the people who from McKinley who would like to come, because I wouldn't want to have anybody there whose loyalties are some other place. And of course, all of the teachers out there were good people, but it appeared to me that we got the better portion of the lot. The lovely people who said, oh yes, they'd be happy to work at the new school, and those positions that were not filled with the first split of the McKinley faculty, I was able to pick them up based on my later contacts, you know, and those who came to apply. In the beginning, we had no colors, we had no school song, we didn't have any of that. We hadn't been there long enough. We didn't think about school songs and anything like that in the earlier days. That wasn't a thing to be thought about the first day or anything like that. We had a football team that had not played football under the name of Capitol High School. That had to be taken care of, and what would be our mascot, all of that had to come later. You see, we were like a family moving into a new house. We had it, but we hadn't lived there long enough for it to have any real meaning. You see what I'm driving at? It takes, when you move into a home or into a house, it's the living in the house that makes you call it home. And something else had happened. The board's thinking was that the junior high school population in East Baton Rouge Parish needed special attention, so to speak. Well, this was happening. The central office evidently had reports that the junior kids in all of the schools weren't exactly fitting into the activities of our schools, and they were going to build another building. That was several years later, after the opening of Capitol High School. We heard talk of the new school that was going to be built in the same community, not too far away from where we were. They wanted a setting in which 6th, 7th, 8th grades could grow without the other things, you see. We're going into a new era now, when it finally came that the new school on 23rd Street was completed, and everybody was wondering who would be the principal there. It wasn't an automatic thing that I would be, but that's the way it came out. The person who called me originally was an old school man, and he knew a little about me, and he had ideas of what would happen once I got there. We think you'd enjoy it, and the kids will enjoy you. Well, I knew I had fallen in love with school kids in the other jobs I'd had. I was told that I would be the principal of the new setting if I wanted to. Well, I couldn't turn that down. And I don't know if I had any special reasons for saying I couldn't turn it down, but when it was offered, I said yes, and so we just moved on over to 23rd Street. Something began to happen to me. That's where I got stuck. I felt a responsibility to those kids and to those mamas and papas who depended upon us. And I wound up walking up there to head the school. There we were, we were a proud bunch of people out there. And we had feelings about what was happening at Capitol, you see, and what was happening to our youngsters. We had more of everything for our high school youngsters than we had ever dreamed of. We had high hopes But here, when we walked in, all of these things, so many of these things that we had never even thought about having. We always had to make shift to get them done. Here it was already set up. A huge auditorium, that was an auditorium. Home economics departments. A science department where a whole bottom of a whole frame of rooms just for the teaching of science. A whole battery of rooms to teach social studies and English and so on. We were in the building for a year. They were still working on some phases. Like the patio, that wasn't finished when we got there. We had to wait until they finished that. And some of the sidewalks and the lockers hadn't been put in and so on. So that was done after we were in the building and operating. On rainy days, youngsters were asked to bring from their lawns St. Augustine grass on the wet days and just bring it to the campus and wrapped in newspapers, and we planted that whole court. That's how we didn't buy that grass. Youngsters brought the grass that's on the lawn there now. The roots were brought from their individual homes on rainy days. When they're ready to come to school, they'd go out and pull from their lawns where the grass was growing over the walk and just pick it up and put it in the newspaper and bring it to school. And the janitors sometimes would take it from them and go out there and take a shovel and open up the ground. And we had a general idea. We wanted a pretty setting, and we'd keep it that way and add to the beauty that was there in all the ways that we could. So we had to begin to live with these things. We couldn't sing about those things because we hadn't been with them long enough. As I use that, well, that's what home is, you see. You love it in the good and the bad. Well, the same thing was happening now in this new setting. We had to start living in this new setting before we could write about it and sing about it. For those for whom the institution was going to make a difference in their lives, they had to have the experiences first. And of course, the beginning days, in fact, I would want to feel that, as I recall it, most of the days on 23rd Street were beautiful days. I look back on them now as they were some of the happiest times I ever knew, because so many things happened to so many people. Of course, the junior high was now able to serve that group of youngsters who were down on Capitol Avenue. And the people there evidently were doing a good job, because as they filtered into the high school, the adjustment was much easier for them, you see. They didn't have to go through make too many complete changes to anything. They just came right on in and melded into the high school setting, and finally they too were graduates. But that's what began to happen after the system had made these adjustments in the two buildings, you see, in the two settings.
As you can see, Capitol High School has certainly come a long way in the past 44 years. This is a special place to many people because Capitol High School was a part of their lives. Great memories. Yet the greatness of Capitol High School must live on, and you can help. Do your part to help keep Capitol High School a positive learning environment. Get involved, donate some time, some energy, maybe even some love, such that Capitol High School, the opportunities, the education, the memories can live on in greatness. I'm Ed Buggs. Good night.